A 1,991 paper out of the Auburn fisheries program measured what happens to a small pond when you add a single $40 aerator running off a $50 solar panel. The answer was not what the catalogs were selling at the time. Dissolved oxygen at the 4-foot depth climbed from 3.5 parts per million to nearly 7 by the end of the second week. Bluegill survival in the first stocking cycle went from 41% to 93%. 3 years later, that same pond was producing roughly 1,000 catchable largemouth a year on a quarter acre, and the whole rig, including the liner, had cost the man who built it under $300. I have built that same rig 3 times in Lancaster County over the last 14 years. I am going to walk you through it as 3 legal methods stacked on top of each other. Method A is the solar aeration build. Method B is the bluegill-first stocking cycle that gets you to 1,000 bass a year through compounding. Method C is the legal layer, the 14 states that quietly turned this into a permit problem, and how to know whether you are in one of them. Before we get into Method A, I want to anchor the science for all 3. The Auburn paper I just mentioned is Boyd and Tucker, published in the Journal of the World Aquaculture Society 1991, archived at the Auburn Fisheries Library at the Swingle Hall complex. It tested oxygen rebound on 6 small ponds in the southern Alabama clay belt. The finding that mattered for our purposes was simple. A small continuous aerator running roughly 18 hours a day, even at a low output, did more for fish carrying capacity than a single high output unit running on a timer. Penn State Extension repeated a version of this in 2008 inches Bulletin AERS 117, archived at the Pattee Library in University Park. Same conclusion. Continuous low output beats burst high output for warm water species. That is the engine that makes the $300 rig possible. You are not buying more aeration, you are buying continuous aeration. And the cheapest way to run something continuous on a quarter-acre pond in 2026 is a solar panel and a battery, because you skip the trenching, the electrician, the meter, and the monthly bill. On the legal side, stocking your own pond on your own deeded property where the water does not drain to a navigable waterway requires no permit in 28 states. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri, Arkansas, the Dakotas, most of the inland west. 14 states require a permit, and we will get into the list in Method C. Verify with your state fish and game office before you put 1 fingerling in the water. I am not your lawyer. Method A. The solar aeration build for under $110. Here is the mechanism in 1 paragraph. Warm water holds less oxygen than cold water. A quarter-acre pond at 84 degrees in late July can drop below 3 parts per million dissolved oxygen at the 4-foot layer overnight, especially after a hot, windless day where algae respires through the dark hours and pulls oxygen down. Below 3 parts per million bass start to suffocate. Bluegill tolerate down to about 2. Catfish a little lower. What aeration does is 2 things. It puts oxygen directly into the water at the diffuser, and it breaks the thermocline by mixing the warmer top water with the cooler bottom water. The mixing matters as much as the bubbling. Now the recipe. 1 linear diffuser stone, 12 inches, ceramic, around $11 at any aquaculture supply or a feed store that carries pond gear. 20 feet of weighted air line, 3/8 inch, about $14. 1 12-volt diaphragm air pump rated for 2 to 3 liters per minute, around $26 on the larger marketplaces. 1 50-watt monocrystalline solar panel, about $42 off-season. 1 12-volt, 20-amp-hour AGM battery, around $31 at a farm supply. 1 10-amp solar charge controller, $8. Total parts cost about $132. Add a 5-gallon weatherproof plastic tote to house the battery and controller at the pond edge, and you are under $140. Now the assembly. Mount the panel on a south-facing post at 30 degrees of tilt for the latitude band running across the middle of the country. Wire the panel into the charge controller. Wire the controller to the battery. Wire the air pump to the battery's load terminals. Drop the diffuser at the deepest point of the pond, weighted by the line, and run the air hose back to the pump at the edge. Cost, time, species, $132 in parts. About 4 hours of labor for a man who has done this before. 6 to 8 for a first-timer. Works for bluegill, largemouth bass, channel catfish, perch, crappie. Honest answer for method A. It does not work in a pond shallower than 5 feet at the deepest point. There is not enough column for the thermocline to set up, and you are wasting oxygen at the surface. It also does not work if your pond is over a half acre, because a 2 to 3 liter per minute pump is undersized. For a half acre, you double the diffuser count and step up to a 4 liter pump, which puts you around 190 in parts. Still under 200. Pause the video here and screenshot the parts list. One 12-inch ceramic diffuser, 20 feet of weighted 3/8 air line, one 12-volt 2 to 3 liter air pump, one 50-watt panel, one 20-amp-hour battery, one 10-amp charge controller, one weatherproof tote. About $132 total. That is method A, method B. The bluegill-first stocking cycle that compounds into roughly 1,000 catchable bass a year by year 3. Most pond owners do this backward. They go to a hatchery. They get told to stock bass at 100 per acre and bluegill at 500 per acre. They pay around $4,000 for a quarter-acre stocking package, and 2 years later they have a pond full of stunted bass that never grew past 10 inches because there was nothing to eat. Jonas Byler taught me the right way over a fence post in the spring of 1985. Jonas was a carp and bluegill man over in Paradise. His father had run 3 ponds on the family lot since 1944, and Jonas had a way of explaining stocking that finally made sense to me. He said the pond is a stair. You build the bottom step first. The mechanism is forage compounding. A female bluegill spawns 3 to 7 times per summer. Each spawn 500 to 2,000 fry. A pound of bluegill biomass produces enough fry in a season to feed roughly 4 pounds of base growth if you let the bluegill go a full year before any base touch the water. Skip that year and you collapse the forage base before it can compound. Recipe: Year 1, spring. Stock bluegill only. 50 pounds of mixed-size bluegill per acre, ranging from 2-inch fingerlings to 6-inch breeders. For a quarter acre, that is roughly 12.5 pounds, which runs you about $96 from a regional aquaculture supplier that does mail order in coolers. If wild capture is legal in your state, you can collect bluegill yourself from a friend's stocked pond with permission, or from approved public water where the regulations permit private transport. Pennsylvania allows this with a basic fishing license up to 25 fish per day, and the bluegill must come from a body of water you are licensed to fish. Check your state code Year 1, fall. Add fathead minnows, 5 pounds per acre. For a quarter acre, that is about $37. Year 2, spring. Stock channel catfish fingerlings, 50 per acre. For a quarter acre, 12 fingerlings, runs about $24. Catfish do not eat bluegill once the bluegill are over 3 inches, so they fill the bottom of the food web without disrupting the forage compounding. Year 2, fall. Add 5 more pounds of fathead minnows if your population looks thin. Year 3, spring. Now you stock largemouth bass. 50 largemouth fingerlings per acre. For a quarter acre, 12 to 13 fingerlings, about $40. By the time these bass hit 10 inches, your bluegill population is producing somewhere around 40 to 60,000 fry per spawning season on a quarter acre. The Auburn carrying capacity tables in the Boyd Tucker work I cited earlier suggest a quarter acre aerated pond can support around 250 pounds of bass biomass at equilibrium. Compounding through a full forage base means roughly 1,000 catchable individuals cycling through that biomass over a calendar year. given normal mortality and fishing pressure. Total stocking cost across the 3-year cycle. About $197 if you buy from a supplier, under $60 if you legally wild capture the bluegill and minnows yourself. Honest answer for Method B. The compounding only works if you have aeration in place from Method A. Without continuous oxygen, your bluegill spawn fails in late July and your forage base collapses in year 2. The whole stair falls over. It also will not work if you skip the forage and stock base in year 1 because the hatchery sales rep told you to. I made that mistake on my first pond in 1979 and waited 5 years for it to correct itself. Pause and screenshot the stocking calendar. Year 1 spring, 50 pounds bluegill per acre. Year 1 fall, 5 pounds fatheads per acre. Year 2 spring, 50 channel cat fingerlings per acre. Year 2 fall, 5 pounds fatheads. Year 3 spring, 50 largemouth fingerlings per acre. That is Method B. Method C, the legal layer. This is where most pond owners get blindsided. There are roughly 14 states where what I just walked you through requires a permit, a notification, or both. The list as of the most recent regulatory cycle: California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming for any largemouth stocking. New York requires a private pond stocking permit through the Department of Environmental Conservation, application form available on their public site. New Jersey, same. Maryland for any non-native stocking. Virginia for any stocking over a quarter acre. Florida for any largemouth introduction outside of native range. Vermont, Massachusetts. Minnesota for any largemouth in waters above a certain elevation, that is the 14. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri, Arkansas, the Dakotas, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, the Carolinas, West Virginia. Clear for private pond stocking on deeded land that does not drain to navigable water. Verify with your state agency. Regulations change. The mechanism behind why 14 states regulate this and 28 do not comes down to 2 things. First, watershed sensitivity. States with intact native salmonid fisheries treat largemouth as an invasive risk. The Pacific Northwest is the heaviest example. Second, captured aquaculture industry. A few states wrote their permitting language in close consultation with commercial hatchery lobbies, which means the permit fee structure happens to make wild capture or self-stocking impractical, while leaving commercial hatchery delivery untouched. Pennsylvania Title 58, the Fish and Boat Commission Code, specifically exempts private pond stocking on landowner deeded property at Section 73.6, archived in the Commission's public regulatory database. New York's Environmental Conservation Law Section 11 to 1903 does the opposite. Case study. A man named Carl up in north central Indiana, 58 years old, retired electrician, 2 acres outside Plymouth. Built the solar rig in May 2022 for $137 in parts. Stocked bluegill in spring 2022, fatheads that fall. Channel cat spring 2023. Largemouth spring 2024. By fall 2024, he was pulling out 14 to 16-inch bass on a weekend basis, kept a logbook, counted 87 catchable bass landed in the September through November window of 2025 alone. Extrapolated across the full open water season that is in the range we are talking about. His total spend across 3 years, including the aerator, the stocking, the liner repair, and a small EPDM patch he did in year 2, was $411. Honest answer for Method C. The legal list moves. Idaho amended its private pond rule in 2023. Florida is actively reviewing its largemouth introduction permitting as we speak. 2 of the states I just named could be off the list in 18 months, and 1 or 2 could be added. Always confirm with your state agency the week you stock. Pause and screenshot Method C. 14 permit required states approximately. California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia for over quarter acre, Florida, Vermont, Massachusetts, Minnesota, and high elevation waters. That is method C. One more piece I want to add to method C before the comparison, because I get this question every time. People want to know whether wild fingerling capture is legal in their state, separate from the largemouth permit question. The answer in 22 states is yes for bluegill, fathead minnows, green sunfish, and pumpkin seed, provided you hold a basic fishing license and the species are not on the regional invasive watch list. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri, Arkansas, the Dakotas, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, New Mexico, Wisconsin. Daily limits vary. Pennsylvania allows 50 panfish per day. Tennessee allows 100. Indiana has no daily limit on bluegill from approved waters but caps minnows at 50 per day. The mistake people make is assuming the daily limit is a one-trip rule. It is not. You can wild capture across multiple days in the same week, as long as each day's catch stays within the limit and is documented on your license card if your state requires that. 3 weekend trips in May with a 5-gallon bucket and a small minnow seine legal in Pennsylvania will give you the full stocking population for a quarter-acre pond at $0 in fish cost. The Penn State Cooperative Extension has a free guide on small pond forage capture, Bulletin number AERS 94, archived at the Pattee Library, worth pulling. The other piece on the legal layer is the navigable waterway question, because a lot of people get tripped up here. Your pond is a private water body. If it is on deeded land you own, it has no inlet from a stream that crosses property lines downstream, and it does not drain into a tributary of a navigable waterway, which under federal law means anything large enough to support interstate commerce historically or currently. The 2023 Sackett decision narrowed the federal definition of navigable water, which means the federal layer is less aggressive than it was. The state layer still applies. A pond fed by rainwater and a single sealed well with no surface inlet or outflow is the cleanest case. A pond fed by a small intermittent stream that dries up in August is a gray case. A pond fed by a year-round creek that crosses a county line downstream is probably regulated. When in doubt, the question to ask your county conservation district office is whether your pond is classified as a private impoundment or a regulated waters of the state feature. The classification determines everything else. Now the side-by-side. Method A is roughly $132 in 1 weekend of labor. Method B is $197 spread over 3 years, or under $60 if you wild capture where legal. Method C is $0, but it is the hour you spend on your state agency website making sure you are clear before any fish go in the water. The three together come in under $330 if you buy everything new, and the case I walked through ran under $412 all in, including a small repair. None of this works in winter for the base species. If your pond freezes solid for more than 4 weeks, you need a separate winter aeration protocol, which is its own video. None of this works for trout, which need cold, deep water and a fundamentally different stocking schedule. None of this works in any state where you have not personally verified the regulations the month before you stock. I had this backwards for the first 8 years I kept ponds. I stocked bass first because the hatchery rep told me to in 1979, and I watched 2 ponds collapse before Jonas Byler explained the stare to me over a fence in 1985. Pick one method and run it for a season. Method A first, by itself, on whatever pond you already have. Let the oxygen come up. Let the existing forage population stabilize. If you are starting from a bare pond, do Method A in spring, then Method B starting the following spring. If you are in one of the 14 states from Method C, call your state agency before you order one fingerling. There is a method I have not shown you yet, which is the late autumn pond turnover protocol that prevents the November fish kill that takes out half of the new builds in their first cold year. I want to walk through that one next, because if you do everything in methods A through C correctly and then lose your stock to a fall turnover event, the 3 years of work goes to nothing in a single overnight. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Comment below your county and your pond size. Tell me which method you are starting with and which state you are in, and I will address the most common ones in the next video. That is what I have got for you tonight. Tight lines, deep water, and stay curious.